Anna, Representative Troy Downing be allowed to sit on this dais and participate in today's hearing without objection. So ordered. The Committee on East Asia and the Pacific will come to order. This hearing aims to explore strategies for the United States to reduce global dependence on the People's Republic of China for critical minerals by partnering with the private sector and allied nations. Let me now recognize myself for an opening statement. I think we're still morning, so good morning and welcome to East Asia and the Pacific Subcommittee's hearing titled Breaking China's Chokehold on Critical Mineral Supply Chain. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us this morning. Critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, and others are the building blocks of modern technology, powering electric vehicles, microchips, and advanced defense systems. Global demand for these minerals is surging, with lithium demand alone growing nearly 30% annually from 2021 to 2024, driven by rising electric vehicle battery production. Yet, the People's Republic of China, or PRC, controls 92% of global rare earth element processing and dominates the manufacturing of battery and magnet components. This chokehold, reinforced by China's tens of billions in global mining investments and tactics like price manipulation and export restrictions, poses a direct threat to the United States and our allies. While the U.S. possesses significant mineral resources, domestic production alone cannot meet the speed or scale of this demand. The U.S. manufacturing, their operation costs increase significant in the region, increasing the regional bureau. It will take decades to permit a natural mining in America. Moreover, the federal government lacks the financial capacity to fully subsidize the level of investment needed to drive large-scale private sector investment expansion of domestic production. Relying solely on domestic solutions is insufficient, therefore, so we need a bold global strategy to secure resilient, diversified supply chains free from Chinese control. The current geopolitical landscape offers an opportune window to act. The recent developments, such as President Trump's critical minerals agreement with Ukraine and the U.S. facilitated peace deal in the Democratic Republic of Congo, open new opportunities to access vital resources. We've also seen coordination like the recently announced Quad Critical Minerals Initiative underscore the importance of critical minerals to broader regional engagement. As the administration renegotiates trade relationships, we can strengthen partnerships with our allies to build non-Chinese supply chains, enhancing both economic and national security. So today's hearing, we will explore these challenges and opportunities. We will examine how to build a proactive global strategy to establish supply chains free from Chinese dominance. So our goal today is very clear: to ensure the United States and its allies have secure, reliable access to the critical minerals that will define the future of technology and security. I look forward to a productive discussion. And now, let me now recognize the ranking member from California, Representative Berra, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And obviously, this is an incredibly important hearing. Your testimony could be my testimony, and that demonstrates the bipartisan nature of creating redundant supplies of critical minerals and rare earth elements, weaning ourselves off of the chokehold that China currently has, where we've watched them use their current export restrictions on rare earths in retaliation to some of the trade negotiations that President Trump's leading. We can't be dependent on that. And again, so with that, certainly thank you for this important hearing. Creating and building a diversified, resilient, secure critical mineral supply chain is crucial to our national security. That's why landmark legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, in which Senator Manchin played a key role, led to historic investments to support domestic critical mineral supply chains and started to diversify us away from foreign entities of concern. Unfortunately, in the Big Beautiful Bill, some of these demand incentives with regards to electric vehicles, battery manufacturing, et cetera, potentially are going to be undermined. And that's something that, certainly as we look at implementation of this bill, I think we ought to correct to continue to build those demand signals. Also, while domestic production of critical minerals is crucial for the United States' security, we can't do it alone if we want to shift away from reliance with China. That's why our subcommittee is going to play an important role to make sure the State Department, the Development Finance Corporation, and other national security agencies have the tools they need to build resilient global supply chains. I've, in the prior administration, worked closely with the State Department, worked closely with Undersecretary Fernandez to build those strong international partnerships on supply chain resilience, both bilaterally and through multilateral initiatives, including the Minerals Security Partnership. The MSP brings together 14 partner countries, including Australia, India, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom, as well as the European Union, to strengthen critical mineral supply chains. The MSP Finance Network convenes development finance institutions like the DFC and its equivalents in the MSP partner nations to leverage private sector investment for critical mineral projects, focusing on minerals that are most relevant for advanced technologies, defense, energy, and industrial processes. It's a positive sign that our ally, South Korea, has now succeeded the United States as chair of the MSP. That said, we've got to continue to work with the State Department and continue its robust leadership in the MSP to ensure that MSP projects are meeting our national security goals. That's why today I've introduced the Bipartisan Mineral Security Partnership Authorization Act with my colleague, Chairwoman Kim and Representative Moylan, to authorize the State Department to lead the U.S. participation in the MSP. As our committee works to pass bills, including reauthorizations of the Development Finance Corporation and State Department, it's critical that we work in a bipartisan nature to ensure that we have clear international strategy for securing critical mineral supply chains. The MSP is central to the State Department's role in this strategy, and I look forward to hearing our witnesses' suggestions on how we can strengthen the MSP to be more expansive. With that, I look forward to hearing the testimony from the witnesses, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to now have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic, and I'd love to introduce them. The Honorable Frank Fannon, the Managing Director of Fannon Global Advisors. Thank you for joining us. The Honorable Joseph Manchin, former U.S. Senator of West Virginia. Thank you for joining us. The Honorable Jose Fernandez, former Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, the E family, at the State Department of State. Thank you for joining us. This committee recognizes the importance of the issues before us and is grateful to have all of you here to speak with us today. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. I now recognize Mr. Fannon for your opening statement.
Thank you, Subcommittee Chair Kim and Ranking Member Barra, for the opportunity to speak on one of the most pressing national security challenges of our time. China has been waging what I have termed a quiet war against the United States for years. This is not a war fought with missiles and bullets, but one waged with minerals and refineries. The Chinese Communist Party has systematically weaponized its control over critical mineral supply chains as part of a broader strategy to displace the United States as the world's indispensable power. U.S. intelligence agencies have confirmed that Communist China is an existential threat for many years, yet Washington has been reluctant to take the necessary and sometimes difficult actions. Unlike the West, Beijing does not subscribe to the definition of war as simply acts of force, but instead follows Sun Tzu's guidance that supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting, and recommends first attacking his strategy. Wars are fought with industrial capacity and the supply chains to fuel it. The CCP seeks to win its war by depriving the United States the means to ever wage a kinetic one. China controls most of the critical minerals that underpin defense and weapon systems, energy technologies, and the building blocks for the modern economy. Although America has a significant resource endowment, the U.S. is 100% import reliant on nearly a quarter of the 50 critical minerals and over 50% reliant on 29 of them. The United States must take bold actions rather than spend time increasing awareness of the problem. President Trump's executive orders signal a meaningful shift toward action. With that in mind, I would like to touch on a few of the recommendations from my written testimony. First, the United States should be clear that it is focused on critical minerals for national and economic security. By adopting security as America's organizing principle, the U.S. can take the appropriate countermeasures. Further, this clear goal will signal to partners, governments, resource-rich nations, and investors that America is serious and committed to mineral security. Next, the U.S. must right-size, modernize, and use its international finance tools. China has deployed more than $1 trillion in Belt and Road initiatives, including in critical minerals. And in 2023, increased mining and metals-focused investments 158% over 22 levels. The United States should not try to emulate the Chinese state-led model. Instead, should leverage its comparative advantage, the American private sector. This requires an appropriate federal financing partner on the other side. And then the DFC and Ex-Im Bank are those partners. For the U.S. government, the DFC and Ex-Im can advance America's foreign policy. From the business lens, they are sources of catalytic capital and, importantly, a means to de-risk investment opportunities in emerging markets. Congress should significantly increase the DFC's funding and fix the scoring problem that treats equity investments as grants. The Ex-Im should be more nimble, lower domestic content requirements, and have greater risk tolerance. The DFC and Ex-Im should prioritize partnerships with American investors and companies and disqualify parties with substantial Chinese ownership interests. This approach is consistent with the important strengthening of the foreign entity of concern provisions included in the One Big Beautiful Bill. To meet our challenges will require working with partners and allies, but America's minerals diplomacy should focus on performance-based partnerships that include objective measures such as dollars invested and tons of material mined. China is the lowest cost producer through state investments and shirking labor and environmental protections. Congress should highlight China's unethical and inhumane practices. By increasing transparency, the U.S. and free nations can impose penalties or establish barriers against unethically sourced critical minerals and thereby catalyze differential pricing. Breaking China's chokehold requires moving beyond semantic debates about decoupling versus de-risking and adopting a bold strategy necessary for victory. I stand ready to work with this committee and the administration and to ensure America wins this quiet war and secures our critical mineral independence for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fannin. I now recognize Mr. Manchin for your opening statements.
Chairwoman Kim and Ranking Member Bear, I want to thank you all and the members of this committee for the opportunity to share my perspective on this vital and bipartisan economic and national security issue. It's something I put years of work into during my time as chair and ranking member of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, as well as the Senate Armed Services Committee. When I joined the Senate in 2010, China put rare earth export controls on Japan, following a territorial dispute over islands they claimed ownership of, which should really sound familiar to all of us. From that moment, through the Energy Act of 2020, which created the critical minerals list itself, through my last day in the Senate, I focused on this issue. And while there has been good legislation, there remains much more to be done. If I could leave you with one thing today, it's to impress the urgent need for us and our allies to have strong, reliable, critical mineral supply chains across the three phases: extraction, processing, and manufacturing, so that no part of the process is in the hands of an adversary. The solution includes the use of our financing tools, like the Development Finance Corporation, the Defense Production Act, and the Export-Import Bank. We need to reauthorize and strengthen these key financial tools so that we have a full toolbox. And given the committee's focus, we must keep in mind that none of this works without diplomatic engagement. The Senate Department must focus on energy security with experts who understand the complexity of resource economics and energy geopolitics, with emphasis to prioritize the issue in country. Finally, we need to make sure that this effort is coordinated so that efforts across so many agencies are effective and don't work at cross purposes or waste investments. Here's why this matters now more than ever. Just like Putin weaponized Russia's oil and gas resources to try to scare off Europe from supporting Ukraine, Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party are more than willing to use critical minerals as leverage to put Americans and the free world at risk. They have ramped that up in earnest recently by flooding the market with oversupply, driving prices down, and leaving producers worldwide unable to compete, and then using export controls once they dominate the market. In fact, at the end of 2023, I held a hearing in the wake of the first round of China's export restrictions on gallium and germanium, two critical minerals that are needed for semiconductor fabrication. As I feared that export restrictions became a ban in the late 2024, with recent trade disputes, they have gone even further by cutting off our supplies of rare earths, antimony, tungsten, and more. That is why tariffs are so important. Tariffs are needed to protect the building blocks of our economy and national security, as well those of our allies, from China's market distortions and economic malfeasance. That is what tariffs are for, to protect strategic industries by penalizing bad actors and keeping the U.S. prices competitive. Even worse than Europe's addiction to Russian gas, which is about 45% of supply in 2021, we are over 90% reliant on China for graphite, gallium, rare earths, over 60% reliant germanium, over 70% reliant for high-grade cobalt and nickel, and I could go on and on. And China's critical mineral grip extends around the entire globe. They control mines throughout the world, all of which feed a processing and manufacturing powerhouse that they control. So just as we cannot solve this problem alone, we are not in this mess by ourselves either. We must acknowledge that while we can provide much of the minerals we need domestically, we don't have the capacity to produce or process every mineral in the quantities that we need here in the United States, in North America, or even in the newly formed AUKUS security partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the U.S. Even if capacity weren't an issue, we can't afford to spend $1 billion per mineral to support domestic suppliers. Our debt is a national security threat too, and we must come to grips with that. Permitting reform is essential to fast-track domestic production, but we also need to ensure that we are working with trusted and reliable partners when it comes to overseas mineral sourcing. That means looking first to friends like Canada, Australia, Japan, and Norway, but also building new trusted partners throughout efforts like the Mineral Security Partnership and countering China through the energy and mineral diplomacy efforts under the committee's jurisdiction. We must also be extremely cautious of our policies where the Chinese have a majority of control, like the Democratic Republic of Congo and Indonesia, and don't get sucked in when they have total control either. So in closing, the time to solve this issue is now, and Congress has a grave responsibility to step up to the plate. I look forward to your questions, and thank you for asking me to be here today.
Thank you, Mr. Manchin. And now I recognize Mr. Fernandez for your opening statements.
Thank you, and good morning. Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Bear, members of this committee, thank you for having me here. I'm going to try and be brief because I very much share what's been said before me. Briefly stated, we have a need and we have a problem. The need is that the world needs exponentially more critical minerals and rare earths. We need them for just about anything and everything that we use: data centers, semiconductors, energy, battery storage, EVs, and these numbers are staggering. In the last couple of years, the demand for energy battery storage has doubled. The IEA tells us that by 2050, we'll need 42 times the amount of lithium that we use today. That's the need. The problem is that the PRC controls or owns just about all, if not, or at least most of these minerals. 2/3 of the world's lithium and cobalt, 100% of the graphite, 19 out of 20 strategic minerals. This is a strategy that the PRC has followed now for over decades. It also involves subsidies. The IEA has estimated that 20 to 40% of the cost of a mine in China is subsidized by the government. That is the problem, and we, as the senator just outlined, the PRC has been willing to exercise this dominance. We saw it even this year with the 7 heavy rare earths. When I was in office, we helped to deal with the germanium export controls. We were able to secure 25% of the world's global supply through our allies and partners. We've also seen the PRC use predatory pricing. That's what a monopolist does. It uses its power in order to drive down the competition. So what have they done? They have flooded the market. The price of cobalt, the price of lithium has gone down 75, 80%. The price of cobalt today is lower than the price in 2017. That is part of the strategy. But there's a bright side. There's a bright side. And that is that we are pushing an open door. When we started working on the Mineral Security Partnership and I went to our allies and partners, they shared the same concerns. They actually were looking to do something about their diversification of critical minerals. They saw the same need, and when we proposed the MSP concept, they bought it immediately. They wanted U.S. leadership. That's our partners and allies. Producing countries want our investments. We don't bribe. We follow the law. We don't bring in our workers. So we created the Mineral Security Partnership based on the premise that no country can solve this problem alone. We had 4 lines of effort. We shared information with our partners because if we couldn't put together the deal for a mine, perhaps other countries could. We did what private equity and banks do, which is we finance together in order to de-risk and minimize the risk. We included recycling projects because we are told that 30% of the world's need could be met in the next 10, 20 years by recycling. And lastly, we had to make a better offer, and our offer was we would adhere to high ESG principles because we could not win a race to the bottom. And so we had to change the terms of the debate. We were successful. We were a deal shop. We were not a talk shop. We had over 30 projects that we supported in our 2 years. 13 of those are public. We actually had countries come to me and say, Jose, if our companies invest in a mining deal in country X, we're going to get screwed. But if the U.S. comes, they won't mess with us. So some of what we did was diplomatic support. We also were able to work with our colleagues at the DFC, at Exim Bank, at USTDA in order to finance together. And we were just getting started. I am very happy to see your proposed MSP authorization bill. I welcome it. It incorporates the lessons of the MSP. It gives it the tools for success. It's a partnership with partner countries that tries to galvanize the private sector, and that is our best weapon. That is our secret weapon, our private sector as well as our allies. I've made 3 suggestions in my testimony that I hope we can discuss today. I think we're going to need more funding. If you look at what France, Germany, Australia, Japan, Korea, and others have done, all of those have billion-dollar investment funds in order to de-risk and do early-stage investing. I've also proposed that we not ignore recycling, and lastly, that we create an emergency response team in order to address the continued weaponization by the PRC. But again, I very much welcome your proposed bill, and I hope we can discuss it later this morning. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you to all of our witnesses for your wonderful opening statements. And we'll go into member questioning, and I recognize myself to first ask questions. And I want to pick up on what Mr. Fernandez said about the Chinese predatory tactics. So let me talk about how the significant challenge we face today is China's ability to flood global markets with low-cost critical minerals, leveraging state-backed subsidies. For example, nickel prices that have fallen 75% in the last several years because of the Chinese oversupply. So let me ask this question to Senator Manchin. Why does China's chokehold on critical minerals threaten the U.S. economic competitiveness and national security? And if you can talk about to what extent can domestic production reduce this dependence, and why is international engagement still essential?
When you look at what we're dealing with and look in history, 20th century, beginning of the 20th century, the United States became a powerhouse because of our energy. Back then it was relied upon on coal, made the steel, we did an awful lot of things, and we basically pulled ourselves out of poverty, became an industrial leader. That was necessary for us to have reliable, dependable, affordable energy. Today, critical minerals is the same as that energy was needed back in the 20th century. So in the 21st century, the new boom is going to be basically critical minerals. Well, everything that we do depends on these superconductors and the magnets and all the different things and special alloys and steels that we use. Those are building blocks where I think that we've made a mistake, that we should have trade agreements and we should have basically penalties with tariffs in order to protect our building blocks. That's it. Everything else should be used as an incentive to do trade. But protecting basically our allies and countries across the world that we can rely on. And we have a chain of allies that we can depend on. You have Canada, tremendous cachet of rare earth minerals. Australia, tremendous cachet. United States, possibility of a tremendous cachet we weren't allowed to mine and process. And then you have Japan and South Korea able to do refining. We have a building block right there that we could start and get in the game very quickly. You got to let the private sector in. We can't take this debt on, continue to take all these debts on and the risk. Those are the things. And what happens, if you let China control that, it'll be no different than what Putin tried to do with oil and gas and our allies, same thing. So you've got to have independence.
On that, and then ask Mr. Fannin similar questions too. Given China's capacity to undercut the competitors, what policies can we consider to shield domestic and allied mineral producers from predatory pricing tactics?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is key. What I don't think we can do is rely on traditional conventional norms and practices because China rejects them. Senator spoke about the rare earth dispute in 2010. And the response from the United States at the time, along with Europe and Japan, was to initiate a WTO action against China. It took 2 years for that to be concluded, and it found what we knew, China was cheating. But in that interim, China dumped material onto the market and killed the economic basis for that company, so they went out of business. So what we have to do is a new way of thinking about these things. In terms of what the steps we should pursue, one of those would be, and the Senator mentioned tariffs, I think targeted tariffs is exactly the right approach. China, according to the International Energy Agency, recently concluded that China's cost of capital is 50% less than anywhere else in the world to do a mining project. That's very hard to compete with. Second, the issues on how they do their business. It's very opaque. We don't know how they do their business. It's hard to see. What we know is that they violate environmental and human rights all the time. And actually last year, the Department of Labor issued a report underscoring that. I think a higher degree of scrutiny is important. It could create differential pricing. We always talk about having a green premium because there will be a commodity will produced in a way with lower carbon. But industry is reluctant to pay more for it if they're competing against a commodity at a lower cost. Rather than ask U.S. Industry and U.S. companies to pay more, we should try to level the playing field. I think the administration is keen to do that by making the costs increasing the costs on the Chinese side. At the same time, we have a pacing challenge. The Senator noted the amazing resource abundance in America. It takes a long time to develop a mine. We have to go where the rocks are and where there's a political will to develop them. So it'll be a combination of domestic side, market interventions on pricing, but also to create a favorable environment to develop mines in some of these resource-rich jurisdictions and the mobilization of entities like the DFC.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions to ask you, so hopefully we'll have a second chance to come around questioning. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to my ranking member to ask questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And again, listening to each of the witnesses, you couldn't tell who were the Republican witnesses or who were the Democratic witnesses, which again just emphasizes why this is a nonpartisan issue and it's in our national security interest, and we should certainly approach it from that perspective. Undersecretary Fernandez, we work pretty closely on the Mineral Security Partnership, and again, I think it is the right strategy, working with countries that share our values, take a free market approach, and obviously are have directly felt the impact of economic coercion from the Chinese, which again, I think we're very afraid of. I'm going to ask you about, you made 3 recommendations that we should be thinking about, and one that I've thought a lot about, but I don't think we talk as much about, is the recycling component of it. And if you want to expand on that and how you would think about it as we think about authorizations, investments in recycling. I think you mentioned up to 30% of our supply could come from recycling.
Thank you for your question. This is not my number. This is the IEA saying that in a few years, 30% of our minerals could come from recycled batteries. Right now, we don't have enough batteries to recycle, but in a few years we will. And that's huge. I mean, we heard before that it takes 10, 15, sometimes 20 years for a mine to come on stream. It's much quicker to do a recycling project. The issue has been that there's not enough feedstock in order to feed recycling right now. But so we need to put together incentives. We need to put together mandates in order to make sure that that feedstock exists. But right now, there are companies, the MSP funded and supported a project in the UK, a recycling project that the EU has also supported. There are opportunities right now, and it's yet another opportunity for our private sector to get involved because there's money to be made here.
Great. Senator Manchin, you talked about the various tools that we have available, whether that's the DFC, Exim Bank, Defense Production Act. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that? And I think one thing is this committee goes through the reauthorization process for DFC. What are some fundamental changes other than we do think we need to increase the limits?
Representative Barrett. The question you've asked is a good question because basically what we have is a critical situation in our country right today. National defense authorization would be the way to go right now because you can accelerate, whether it be permitting that you needed for these projects. Permitting is something we've worked on very, very diligently. We've made some inroads, but not enough. In order to do that, to get into the rare earth minerals that we have in our country, I've always said this, you can't ask other countries to do what you won't do for yourself. If we have a cache of rare earth minerals, we should be able to mine them, we should be able to process, and we should be able to manufacture. And working with our allies around the world, we should do the same. You got to form a block, really, and basically a national defense authorization for the defense of our country. And this is what is at stake right now. Can we defend ourselves? Can we have the defense we need? Do we have the critical minerals for that, computers and chips? Do we have it for our economic growth? Compete in AI? All the things we're competing with right now. It's a race, basically, who's going to lead the 21st century and beyond. And the United States has been the leader. It's basically leadership's looked upon from the free world, and whether we survive or not. So with that, I think it's critical to use what you have now, but the big elephant in the room right now is national defense authorization. It allows you to bypass an awful lot of this and determination that we've got to have this done as quickly as possible, and it could be.
Great. And Undersecretary Fernandez, if my colleague from California, Dr. Ruiz, was here, he's bent my ear a lot on Lithium Valley, the Salton Sea, and the possibilities there, thinking about just the vast supplies of lithium potentially there, and doing it in an economically responsible way. I know he's talked to you in the past about this. Would you want to just expand on the potential? That is one of the poorest counties in California, if not the country, and doing something like that in a responsible way seems possible.
I'm familiar with that project, and that's a project that, like several other projects in the U.S., is quite promising. And I think we need to find ways of supporting it. The senator spoke about permitting. Both sides recognize that this is a problem. We've got to speed that up. We don't have the luxury of time. The other thing on lithium goes to the question that Chairwoman Kim asked about oversupply. We have oversupply is a temporary problem. Our demand for lithium keeps going up year after year, 10, 20% over the last five years. But the prices go down. Why is that? Because of oversupply. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the history, in 10 years, the world will need more lithium, even with the overabundance that we have today. So what we have to do is find ways to help our industries, to help our companies survive the next 5 to 10 years. It's almost like a boxer hanging on for that round to end so that they can take a break. And so I think we ought to be looking at lithium, and we ought to be looking at the overabundance problem as something that we're going to need to deal now, but that won't be there, hopefully, if we do our job right in the next 10 years.
Thank you.
All right. I now recognize the gentlelady from South Carolina, Ms. Biggs.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And my first question is for Senator Manchin. Given President Trump's March the 20th executive order titled Immediate Measures to Increase American Mineral Production, to what extent can Congress direct the Development Finance Corporation to use the authorities available under the Defense Production Act to finance domestic mining projects?
Anything we do today from the government, we have to consider the debt of the nation, I think. It's very important to all of us. But with that being said, how do we partner up with private is what you're asking, and we can do that. I think the MP project that the President just announced is a very good start. Basically, it's a company that was kind of toyed with the Chinese forever. They really broke the company and put them in bankruptcy, took over basically their production. And basically now we're coming back to where the federal government stepped in to have ownership. A company I'm involved with is called Aramco, just now that we've announced the mining coal, first coal mine in 70 years in Wyoming. It has critical minerals in the binding, which is tremendous opportunity for us to get 2 for 1. And that's going to be something that we think is going to be very promising. There's others in the United States that we can do, but the federal government really has to make, who's going to be the offtake? Is it Department of Defense? Is it going to be the private sector and economy? Well, you've got to protect it from the standpoint that private sector capitalization is going to go where the cheapest prices are. It's just the way the system works, unless it's protected by tariffs that does not allow China to dump on us when you have rare earth, whether it be lithium, granite, germanium, whatever it may be. They can't come in and undercut it to where someone says, well, in the private sector, I'll buy there versus here. And that's where you offset with your tariffs. That's what we think the federal government can do, is they can be the referee. They can put the guardrails on that protects us to grow, not just here, with Canada, Australia, some of our leading partners, Japan, things that they've been able to do. So there's an awful lot that we have that people work with us and be a partnership versus us trying to do it by ourselves.
Thank you. And the second part, what do you feel like are the primary reasons for DFC's limited success in financing mining and quarrying projects, as evidenced by only a 1.2% of its active projects being in this sector?
Time, just time, permitting. You know, give you an example. You can start. I'll give you a perfect example. The Mountain Valley Pipeline, MVP. We tried for a long time. It started out as a $3.2 billion project. Because of litigation and time, end up $8 billion. Companies won't do that. They just won't, unless there's some certainty. And that's why I encourage all of you. Permitting, we've worked hard over the years, and Congressman Westerman is a good friend of mine. We work together very closely, and we have a bill we think is very close to being done. We think you all can take it across the finish line. It really needs to be done. You need to codify that. Even executive orders by the president, with all his goodwill, kind of gets back and forth, seesawed back and forth in process of legislation, if you will. But when you codify something, it's much more permanent. That's what I would encourage. And timing is what's killing everything. They won't go into that unless they know there's going to be an offtake. You can't get an offtake to finance it unless you know they're time sensitive. People are not going to invest billions and billions of dollars knowing they may be strung out 7, 10, 15 years to get something permitted. It has to come to market quicker than that.
Thank you so much for your insight. And my next question is for Mr. Fannin. A recent report highlights a critical vulnerability. The U.S. is completely dependent on imports for 10 essential minerals and over 50% reliant on imports for 30 others. So these include vital materials like gallium, I think we've already mentioned a couple, germanium and graphite, which are crucial for everything from our weapons systems to batteries and electronics. So how important is it that we use supply chain tools capable of tracking these materials down to the specific bolt and chip in a system rather than just broad categories? And how does this level of detail help us pinpoint our vulnerabilities and precisely what needs fixing to keep our systems operational?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The critical mineral supply chain is remarkably complex and it is opaque. It is not like oil and gas. They're huge commodities. They're liquid. They're widely known. Pricing's clear. When it comes to some of these critical minerals, how do you even realize price discovery? What is the price? And who's exerting that pricing power? It's very difficult to even understand that, much less the provenance of some of these things. Some of the minerals, these minor but critically important minerals, are actually produced alongside other commodities. The issue, germanium, the lack of that, there are defense primes who are in really dire straits because they can't source it. Where do they get it? This is an enormous problem. The challenge we have is also where within the U.S. government should that kind of tracking sit. We have, because the administration, successive administrations, the bipartisan nature of this has elevated the awareness of critical minerals. One of the issues now is we have about 15 federal agencies asserting some kind of involvement. Well, how are we going to lead that? How are we going to coordinate that? I think the designation of the National Energy Dominance Council is a good start to help coordinate that and perhaps could start that tracking process for those minerals to understand where are they coming from, and how do we get more of them.
Thank you, and I'm sorry my time has expired. I yield back.
Well, thank you. Let me now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Orsiuski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member Bera, and thank you to all of our witnesses today. I appreciate the focus of this hearing, and there's clearly no question that the PRC's control of much of the critical mineral supply chain makes us more vulnerable. And I want to echo Ranking Member Bera's comments about how I really appreciate the ways in which this has become and remains a bipartisan concern. Because it is a serious concern that our largest global competitor supplies more than 50% of demand for 24 critical minerals, including more than 90% of those rare earth elements as discussed. So I think we all agree that the U.S. needs to do more to do this, and I want to thank our witnesses for providing some suggestions in this space. But I also don't want this Congress or this administration to focus so heavily just on competition that we also lose sight and disregard the very real labor and human rights abuses that we know are happening and that are so prevalent across the mineral supply chain, primarily in artisanal and small-scale mines that operate informally and that are least regulated by governments. For example, reports suggest that major Chinese critical mineral producers use forced labor programs in the Uyghur region. Across the DRC, there are as many as 40,000 child laborers in its cobalt mines. And so sadly, while I applaud some of the actions taken by the administration in this space, some of the tools that are really important in addressing these concerns have actually been taken away by this administration. Just two quick examples. Many of the grant programs within the Department of Labor's Bureau of International Labor Affairs has been cut. We know these are programs that have played a critical role in addressing forced labor and human trafficking across the world. And this administration has also paused enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which has helped expose corruption in business practices. So I'm a member that believes we need all of the tools at our disposal to strengthen access to critical minerals, but I also believe that goes hand in glove with our responsibility to ensure this is a sector that drives equitable growth, supports local communities and is not built on the back of exploiting laborers and especially not exploiting children. So as our president ushers in a more transactional foreign policy, I want to make sure that our investments are also staying aligned with our values. I'll start with you, Mr. Fernandez, in terms of questions. How do we strike that balance? How do we ensure that U.S. efforts to diversify our critical mineral supply chains don't come at the expense of human rights and transparency?
Thank you for your question. Look, there's no conflict here. Good business practices, responsible business practices are our calling card. If you talk to African leaders, they want alternatives. They want alternatives to the PRC. We're not forcing them to do that. They are basically saying to us, we want what they call beneficiation. They want value-added investments, not just mining. They're looking for good labor practices. They complain that the PRC brings their own workers and takes the minerals back home. So they want those kinds of practices. It is our calling card. I've had African leaders get up and give me a hug when I talk to them about what we'd like to do for communities. There are lots of projects around the world that simply don't see the light of day because communities oppose them. They oppose them because of what you mentioned. So I don't see a conflict here. In fact, I see it as a business opportunity. I see it as part of what our offer. Why is our offer better? Yeah. Because we will not engage in the race to the bottom. We will not win a race to the bottom. We will engage in the race to the top. And if we do that, I'll take my chances.
Yeah, good opportunity to both advance American interests, but also do the right thing for humanity. I think I'll have time for one more question, so I'll turn to workforce. We know that over half of the U.S. mining workforce, about 220,000 people, is projected to retire in the next 5 years. As we think about domestic production, we should be concerned about that. We also know the number of mining and mineral engineering programs in the U.S. has dropped from 25 in '82 to 15 in 2023. Very stark contrast to China, which has actually seen an increase in terms of their engineering programs. Senator Manchin, this is an issue you led on in the Senate quite a bit. How do you think we should address the critical talent gap so that Congress is doing all that we can to ensure that we're building a workforce to address the need?
We would encourage you all to pass the Mining Schools Act that we sent over, and I think you all took it under consideration and maybe ran out of time. That's an easy one to pick up and run with right now, which puts us back into the game as far as educating the workforce we're going to need for the future. Let me, if I can just say something about what you had said before. The bottom line is supply and demand. There's a tremendous demand for the products that China is supplying. People really, when push comes to shove, they don't worry a whole lot. They just want that product, and they're paying prices for it, and humans are paying a price, a horrific price. Until we get in the game with our allies in the free world, you're not going to offset that. We have to give an alternative and then protect it with basically tariffs so they can't come and destroy our markets. Then you can put that. But also, we have so many restrictions and obligations that we put on businesses doing business within our sphere of the free world that it makes it more difficult and time-consuming and costly. That's where we have to protect, be more efficient. But the bottom line is supply and demand is what drives it all. But the act that we have, I think you all have that. We're happy to reintroduce it. I can get some of our friends to bring it right back to you all.
Appreciate that. Sounds like we have to get to work. I know I'm over time, so with that, Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you all.
I now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our panelists for being here today. Very important topic about critical minerals, their importance for American safety, security, economic prosperity, and also the challenge that we face with China and their control over key parts of the supply chain. So thank you all for being here. My first question is, how is China currently leveraging its control over the supply chain against us and our allies? Is it mostly focused on economic control, or is there also a national security element that they are laying a trap for us? And I'll go to any of the panelists who want to start.
Well, I mean, they started a long time ago. This is back in the 90s when they saw something that they thought they could control and get involved with. And they're doing the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. The refining they do is basically extremely harmful to the environment to a certain extent that we wouldn't accept that at all. With that being said, they don't have anybody to answer to. You know, their form of government basically allows them to do as they wish. And they've been able to basically capture a market that says, listen, you send all your product to us, they go over and do the mining, send their people over to do the mining, send it back to China to do the processing, refining. No one else was willing to do it. And there is ways to do that. There's technology that can do it much cleaner, much more safer for the environment and for the workers. But they dominated that market and had a 20-year start on all of us. So how do you get that? You can't say, well, we can't sit back and just accept what it is. We can get into the game very quickly. I think the President, Trump, is in Pennsylvania today, in your beautiful state, right next door to my state. And hopefully energy is going to be the topic of what they talk about today. And I think you're going to find some private sector willing to jump into the market now to accelerate that with the help of the government.
Mr. Fernandez?
Congressman, they're using it right now with 7 heavy rare earth materials. It's being used as we speak. But it's more than that. It's not just the exercise of that dominance, it's the threat of that dominance. There are many countries out there that will tell you, we do not want to do certain things because the PRC will retaliate. And so just that threat sometimes is enough to change behavior among our allies and partners. So it's got to go beyond the actual public bans, export bans, and export restrictions.
Mr. Fannin?
Yeah, I just would just add to that. The IEA did a N1 analysis to look at what's the availability of global supplies if you take out China, and it's only about 35% for a lot of these minerals, 35 to 50% of available global supplies as of right now. That changes the entire psychology of when countries interact with one another. They don't want to offend the supplier. So like Germany, for years, claimed that Russia was a reliable gas supplier until they weren't. It's the same. It changes. Why were they unable to do it? It's because so much of their economy was linked to having cheap gas to fuel their manufacturing base. The same now that, like in German Russia gas, now we're America critical minerals with China. We need to reverse that. I think we have the ability to do it, as has been discussed. We just have to move forward and execute quickly.
Well, I appreciate all of your comments. Clearly, a recognition of the problem that we're facing with China's control of the supply chain, and the way that they're using it and leveraging it against us. We've heard some great suggestions about improving permitting, increasing partnerships with our allies. My question is, there has been some discussion around one component of a solution being that the U.S. establish a strategic minerals reserve or a critical minerals reserve. I would love to hear any of your thoughts on that as something that we could do to address this challenge.
Up to about 20, 30 years ago, we used to have critical mineral reserves. You could go around the country and find different deposits of it, and that was eliminated after the Cold War. Thought wasn't needed anymore, which was a bad mistake. I guess everyone's at fault of that, but never thought was needed. But that's what's changed everything. So that would be something that we should do, but we've got to get to production first. Look at what we did with LNG. We were able to do something with LNG is quicker than anything's ever been done, ever thought we could do. And now we replaced most of Russia's oil and gas that was going into our allies in UK and all that, with what we were able to do, because we were able to put that into the market. We could do the same here if we work in collaboration.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial issue. We have a national defense stockpile that exists, but it's remarkably underfunded. There's very little in it. The other thing that I think is important to distinguish is, we talk about the defense industrial base. I think that's a bit of a misnomer. It's just the industrial base. If things get hot, all of our companies will throw in and be involved in an effort. What I think we have to think about is broader. The defense uses, on an annualized basis, about 500 tons of rare earth a year. The U.S. economy as a whole is 10,000 tons. We do have a stockpile that's for the U.S. economy when it comes to oil, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The question is, do we consider that for the broad industrial base for the U.S. economy? And then how do you do it? It's very, very challenging. And I think as Congress considers this and the administration, it's critical to talk to the private sector who are experts in this. Also, we're in a how do you fund it and how do you fill it? When we're so deficient currently, we're going to have to meet our needs and then start. Not dissimilar to the question of recycling. We need to first have a foundation from which to recycle. We first need to have a foundation of resiliency from which to build a reserve. Thanks.
Thank you all. I think it is an important conversation that we have going forward, and appreciate your input today. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me now recognize Representative from Florida, Moskowitz, since he was here first, with all due respect.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Senator, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So, some really good questions on this. I want to spend my 5 minutes with trying to break this down for the American people. Because being the emergency management director during COVID in Florida, I saw how the lack of manufacturing in this country, the reliance on China, was a major detriment in a pandemic. I can't imagine, God forbid, we got into a war in the near future. The surprise that the American people would have of the things that we, A, don't make here anymore, or B, rely on other folks to supply us, supplies that could be cut off. How do we educate the American people? Like, I gotta be honest, when I started learning about antimony, I was like, is that adamantium and Wolverine? Like, I had no idea what it was. And then I realized, oh, this is a real problem. China has us. And they know it. And you know, so what I want to spend some time with you guys is, how do we tell the American people, like, this is kind of wrapped up in the tariff issue with China. China is controlling exports, threatening to control exports, and our U.S. military literally relies on this stuff for some of the most critical weapons that we make. And so China has such a huge advantage. And I want to talk about the stockpile, because that was another lesson we learned during COVID, right? We went to the cupboard and the cupboards were bare, right? That was what we heard. But it was true. It was true. The National Strategic Stockpile was empty. Now, they put $2 billion to build a stockpile, but that's not going to be enough. So I kind of want to open it up. How do we educate the American people on the national security risk and why this is so important? Senator, I'll give you the bite of that.
Well, thank you so much. And you know, I would just take off of that. If history, knowing our history, if you want to read one book that tells you how we became the superpower of the world, how we won World War II, how we were able to be the armament of the world, we supplied the arms that were needed around the world, we outproduced everybody. Read Freedom's Forge. If you want to read one book that tells you exactly who we became and how we became who we are today, that would put everything in perspective what we need to do now, because we're way behind the curve. And you went in eloquently and went into that. If we don't get back to producing, you know, well, you can go back to NAFTA and blame NAFTA. You can blame the USMC. You can blame anything you want. You can blame 1990s allowing China in the WTO. Everything that we allowed to happen, thinking that we could open up after the wall fell. You know.
No, and that's exactly right. Like, we could go back and
we've been lulled to sleep. That's all.
We could figure out how we got here.
Yeah.
But how do we? The American people have a lot going on. There's a lot of incoming,
Got to produce.
a lot of distractions. Yeah. In the rare earth space, especially in antimony, which I want to focus on, how do we cut through to the American people to make them understand what a dangerous situation, quite frankly, we find ourselves in this rare earth space? I supported when the president wanted to sign a deal with Ukraine on rare earth minerals. Most Americans were probably thinking to themselves, why are we even talking? Why is that part of the equation, right? And so we're going to have to. We're never going to manufacture this stuff here, you know, with all the environmental rules, or even if we try, it's going to be such a small amount. We're going to have to depend on allies to do that. And even if we can find the rare earth, we don't have the experience to manufacture it. I mean, the Chinese, it's literally a closely guarded secret. They got specific people with the specific techniques that's been passed down through generations of people, and they are not letting those people leave to go other places to show you how you refine this stuff. How do we explain this to the American people?
Yeah, I think I guess it's really a political question, because I think you're asking, Congressman, is how do you get the American people to buy in so that they are able to, because it's going to cost more eventually, to do
Yeah.
things in a way that,
That's
as we
right.
discussed, does not offend human rights.
But
and
that's
the environment.
exactly right. I mean, like, look, the White House, I've seen them working on this. But they got to work on the communications piece of this, to look the American people in the face and say, you want to know why the cost of military weapons are going up? Here is why we have to spend more money. You want to know why we're doing these tariffs with China? Here is why. Mr. Fernandez, I want to give you a chance before I run out of time.
Look, I think we need a little bit of humility. It took us a long time to dig this hole, and we are in a hole. I think you take some examples. 2 years ago, the PRC imposed restrictions on germanium. I'd never heard of germanium, but it turns out germanium is needed for semiconductors. At that point, we had a problem. We literally spoke to 100 countries and said, do you have any extra germanium you can sell to the world? We actually found some to the MSP, 25% of the world's supply we were able to add. It was just hanging around a country that we'd never heard of. And so I think you've got to go example by example and do the same thing we did during COVID, which is, we have a problem that we didn't have active ingredients in that supply chain, as you know. But you've got to take a couple of examples and say, we've got a problem. And it took us a while to get here. It'll take us a while to dig out of this hole.
The gentleman's time's up. Great question, great answers. I wish we just had more time. But now let me recognize the gentleman from Guam, Mr. Moreland.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for setting this timely topic. Especially 2 weeks ago, the Quad 4 minister met in Washington, D.C. and announced the launch of a major new initiative. And as they clearly stated, reliance on any one country for processing and refining critical minerals further harms our economic and national security. Given this understanding, we need to strengthen both our domestic efforts and international cooperation to build more resilient and diversified critical mineral supply chains. So as part of the domestic efforts, our vast offshore seabed areas have significant potential to boost the supply of critical minerals. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management says the Pacific Outer Continental Shelf, including the surrounding area of Guam, contains 4 different mineral deposit types. And if we can successfully utilize these resources on a commercial scale, it will greatly enhance our supply chain resilience and national security. I hope this effort will be carried out in a manner of respect both local stakeholders and the environment. Another important aspect of the international cooperation to counter China's dominance in critical minerals, China's abrupt restriction of critical material exports caused major disruption in global automotive industry and pose serious threats to defense equipment suppliers. However, we cannot leave these challenges solely to the private entities because, as we know, China employs non-market practices such as large-scale subsidies. And it's extremely difficult for private actors to compete on their own. Securing stable and reliable supply chains is an urgent issue, not only for the U.S., but also international communities. So we need to develop a shared strategy and framework among like-minded countries to build alternative and resilient supply chains. So, Mr. Fallon, you have great experience being the first Assistant Secretary of State, Energy Resources, and do you believe that the State Department needs additional authorities to develop international cooperation and support of private sector investment in foreign countries?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I would say that believe the State Department has considerable authorities. What I think would be useful is to increase the authorities of sister agencies, the International Development Finance Corporation, over which the Secretary of State serves as the chairman. The DFC also is an entity that, by its mandate, is supposed to integrate America's foreign policy as part of their investment thesis. So I think that working with the State Department and that the body of the chair could to empower the DFC to do more, and that has a significant role for Congress in the reauthorization, to empower them to do more, increasing the investment limits, and also to allow for greater equity to be invested. I think that this capital from the DFC is catalytic in the sense that it unlocks other investors. As Jose was speaking, other countries want the U.S. investor there, but how do we get them there? How do we crowdsource additional co-investors? And this is a critically important tool. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator, of course, we know that China controls over roughly 90%, and you were talking about this question earlier as well, of all our critical minerals. But yet, we have all these minerals spread across the US, Australia, and parts of East Asia and beyond. So in your view, what's the most significant factor that enabled China to dominate the market? And what's the most urgent action that we and our partners should take to counter it?
I think, first of all, I want to thank you and the wonderful people of your beautiful island of Guam. I've stopped there many times, and I just have the most respect for the strategic position that you have for our great country in the Pacific Rim. Next of all, I really truly believe the Defense Production Act, if we announced the Defense Production Act is what we're going to use in order to have the defense of our country and our economy and all of our allies, would give us the catalyst that's going to be needed for the Development Finance Corporation to show how determined we are to make sure that we're up and running as quickly as humanly possible, be able to extract and assist all of our friends around the world and the free world, if you will, to contribute towards this. It's going to be a total all-in effort. It's not just one of us can do it. We cannot get up to speed quickly by ourselves without you and all of our friends around the world. That's what we have to rely on. And that's really how we can protect your markets also with the trade, if you will, tariffs, protecting so China doesn't come in and distort your markets that they've tried to do. We've watched how they've been very aggressive in that part of the world, and we're determined basically to defend and help you. I would say one more thing too. Is there some way that when you think about it, if it wasn't for the ore that China gets from Australia right now, what kind of a crimp would that put? What kind of a bind would they be on if we were able to, all the free world, consume Australia's ore so they wouldn't have to go to China for that market? That might be things we could do to really put a pinch on them too.
Thank you. Thank you, all. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative from Rhode Island, Mr. Amo.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim, and thank you to our witnesses for being here, including the distinguished former senator. It's an honor to be with you. For those watching at home, critical minerals and their supply chains are, like the name suggests, critical to our national security and American domestic manufacturing industries. From cell phones to solar panels to our most sensitive defense technologies, we rely on critical minerals every day. But as you know, China is a dominant processor of 19 of the 20 minerals the International Energy Agency considers key minerals. And China has 70% of the global processing capabilities for these minerals. Through export controls, the CCP wields access to these minerals to advance their global policy goals like a guillotine over everyone's head. In December 2024, China banned the export of gallium, germanium, and antimony to the U.S. In February 2025, China further restricted exports of tungsten, tellurium, bismuth, indium, and other minerals. And in April 2025, China cracked down on the exports of 7 heavy rare earth and magnets derived from them. Dysprosium, gadolinium, lutetium, samarium, scandium, terbium, and so on. And now, you know, the fact of the matter is most Americans, the folks that we're talking to at home, have not heard these names since studying the periodic table. And even then, I'm not sure they stored them to memory in their high school sciences classes. But it's important to break this down for the American people. It's critical because of the semiconductor, telecommunication, defense, and renewable energy industries. People around the country need to know this critical impact. Thankfully, President Biden understood the importance of securing our critical mineral supply chains. Under his leadership, the State Department worked with the Development Finance Corporation and our allies to ensure that American businesses were shielded from the CCP's market pressures. In 2022, we established the Mineral Security Partnership, the State Department program that was dedicated to accelerating the development of diverse critical mineral supply chains free from China's control. But we have a challenge at hand because the Trump administration has gone forward with reductions in force that can have an impact that undermines all of these efforts, this awareness that we do have in a bipartisan way to have access to critical minerals. And we saw just last Friday, the State Department lose through their reduction in force and firing of 1,300 employees as a part of a plan to shrink that workforce in a way that is not thoughtful. And instead of working to secure our critical mineral supply chains, Trump is firing experts and causing those remaining to be distracted by fear for their jobs instead of focusing on American interests. And it is a real distraction. So, Undersecretary Fernandez, I'd love to hear from you how these reductions in force harm states' work with other federal agencies like the DFC to help American businesses secure our supply chains, and what should we be doing to work with DFC to continue to play a supporting role in securing critical mineral supply chains?
Thank you for your question. We could talk for a long time about this. And I'll be brief. This has got to be a bipartisan issue because it's a bipartisan problem. It's also an international problem. Our allies and partners understand that this is a problem, which is why we need a strategy. Part of that strategy has to include the DFC. The DFC was a very good partner in the Mineral Security Partnership. Why? Because funding is often the problem that we all need to crack. There are a number of changes in the DFC authorization that, in my eyes, would help. The equity scoring, for example, there's a penalty for investing in equity. The number of countries, the types of countries they can finance projects in, upper middle income countries are a problem. Argentina and Chile have the world's largest deposits of lithium, and yet the DFC can't work in those two countries. And so we've got to find a strategy that turns the DFC loose, that allows us to use all of the tools at our disposal, Exim Bank and TDA as well. And I think that's what the MSP did, and frankly, we had very good cooperation from the DFC.
Thank you. My time has expired, so I yield back.
I now recognize gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, for 5 minutes.
Thank you all. Thanks to our witnesses. Senator, good to see you again. My neighbor from West Virginia, and I want to talk about West Virginia and Kentucky coal in a minute, but let's just frame the problem. Today, China accounts for 70% of global rare earth element mining, 92% of rare earth refining, and 90% of rare earth magnet production. It controls 99% of global gallium refining, which is a key material for advanced microelectronics used in U.S. defense systems. This is a real concern because, as you know, in April, China imposed export restrictions on 7 of 17 rare earths, many of which are essential for U.S. defense platforms, such as the F-35 fighter, which contains 920-plus pounds of rare earths per unit, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and joint direct attack munition smart bombs. U.S. defense firms such as Raytheon, Honeywell, Lockheed Martin face supply delays, rising costs, and potential production halts. So breaking China's chokehold on these critical mineral supply chains will require more domestic production. Senator Manchin, you know this well. The Department of Energy estimates that recoverable coal, coal ash, and coal waste in the United States contains between 11 and 17 million metric tons of rare earth elements. U.S. consumption last year was just 8,800 metric tons. So we're talking about a domestic resource of rare earths that contains over 1,000 times our annual demand for rare earths. Given that scale, Senator Manchin, wouldn't it be a strategic failure not to include coal-based mineral recovery from West Virginia, Kentucky, Wyoming, Pennsylvania, across this great fruited plain as a core pillar of our national critical mineral policy?
Well, thank you. And I think both of our respective states, both of our universities are working very closely on this now as far as extraction from our waste, from our coal finds, things of that sort, and also water coming from coal mines. All that stuff can be turned into a tremendous value for our country. And we're looking at that too, and the cost of that versus with some new mining. I just said earlier that I'm involved with a company called Ramaco, basically, who's coal mining. They're going to open a new coal mine in Wyoming, first one in 70 years. And with that, in the bindings, as people know, layers between the coal, there's an awful lot of critical minerals in that too, which is a great opportunity for us. So I think in all of this, we have to do everything that we can. The bottom line is that we can't make it more difficult for companies in the U.S. through the permitting constraints that happen for us to do what we need to do. If we can get that accelerated, that's going to help us tremendously on that. And I think there's a lot of inroads being made.
Yeah, and I've introduced a bill that would help my constituent company you referred to, Ramaco, expedite the permitting there. I know you were a real leader in reforming federal permitting laws, but they're in the Senate. But there's more work to be done there. I do have a bill called the Rescue Act, which I would urge my colleagues to support, which would use that Fast 41 streamlining process for streamlined permitting for rare earth extraction from coal. I think that's important. But also, Senator Manchin, speak to the potential of using the Defense Production Act. I don't know if you've thought about that, the Defense Production Act to cut through all this red tape to allow for coal mining or extraction of rare earths from coal.
I definitely have been speaking about Defense Production Act. I think it's the one tool that shows the urgency that we have in our country to defend ourselves and be able to help our allies. The other thing is the permitting process. Congressman Westerman and I worked very, very hard and very close and got very close last year, right down to the final bell when the bell rang. There's a piece of legislation I think that you all could take and run with very quickly. We passed it in the Senate. It came out of our committee, basically 15-4, first time, a bipartisan overhaul, working with Senator John Barrasso, our Republican and Democrat colleagues, seeing the need for this. Hopefully you all can take it and make some changes if you need, whatever would be helpful. Judicial reform was the big thing in permitting. The courts will hold you up no matter what you try to do. The courts can hold you up for infinity and just wear you out price-wise.
That's why we might need to cut through that with the Defense Production Act.
Well, I hope you can.
Thank you for your leadership on that. Mr. Fannin, let me just ask you real quick. You answered Mr. Moylan's question well on the potency of DFC in alternative critical mineral supply chains. What about the Office of Strategic Capital at the Department of Defense, also supplementing the catalytic opportunities for supply chain resiliency outside of the United States?
I think it's an incredible tool that hasn't really been utilized yet. I think it's time to get that tool out of the toolbox and start using it. I would also say one of the construct of the OSC is it's only debt. It only provides debt. I think that we talked about fixing the equity fix in the DFC. I would propose respectfully that you consider OSC have some equity authority as well. It makes all the sense in the world. There is a huge level of dry powder there, and also they need help getting that organization up and running and really moving forward. But it's an amazing tool that needs to be used.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Downing, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for allowing me to wave into this hearing on such an important topic, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. In my home district, I've got central and eastern Montana. You know, we've seen firsthand the ability of American adversaries to dominate and manipulate critical minerals markets. You know, the Stillwater mine in Stillwater County, Montana, is the United States' only platinum and palladium mine and has been the victim of deliberate market manipulation by Russia. You know, Russia's dumping of cheap minerals into the international market forced the Sibanye-Stillwater, the owners of the mine, to scale back its operations and lay off 700 well-paid workers at the end of last year. Obviously, it's had an incredible impact on my district and those counties. So China employs similar manipulative tactics to an even greater degree in order to promote dependence and freeze out competition. So I start with Mr. Fannin. In your testimony, you discuss how China will eagerly manipulate the global critical minerals market by restricting supplies on one hand and dumping them later to kill off growing competition. Can you elaborate on the degree to which global market manipulation is part of China's overall critical mineral strategy?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is a playbook that they have used and deployed multiple times, really since 2010, when they first banned the export of rare earths. At the time, President Obama initiated a WTO challenge against China. It took years for that case to go through the WTO process. In the interim period, China dumped material onto the market, crashed prices, and sent the one company, rare earth company, into bankruptcy. A few years ago, China, Xi Jinping said he didn't like the way cobalt was being priced, and announced he was going to look into that. The one cobalt mine in the development project in the state of Idaho that was starting to ramp up, the U.S. government was an investor in, announced that they were going into care and maintenance because the prices crashed. It's just the signal that China has, because it's not just that they're the biggest producer, it's also important to recognize they're also the largest purchaser.
Right.
So they're working it on both sides of the ledger, which gives them massive pricing power, and it goes back to this price discovery challenge we have with China.
Thank you. With regard to combating Russian dumping, I introduced the Stop Russian Market Manipulation Act. It's a bill to ban the importation of platinum and palladium from Russia. And I'll go to the whole panel on this one. What steps can Congress take in order to combat similar efforts by Chinese producers to dominate the international market and crush American competition?
So trade and tariffs are the thing, I think, it's your tool and the tool we have in our great country, basically. Tariffs should be used as an incentive and a protection. Protection, basically, of your building blocks, and we talked about this earlier. The building blocks, we have to have what you're producing in Montana. We have to have that. The free world has to have that. But unless you're protected against the unfair practices of China and countries of concern, whether it be Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, they're never going to have our interest. They're never going to have our view. And with that, you have to protect against them coming in and distorting our markets. That's where the tariffs can be used to protect building blocks.
Thank you. Any further comments? Mr. Fannin?
Yeah, I would just say I would look to, we could shift the presumption. I think Congress has already made a pretty important past legislation in the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which created a presumption that if material, something's being produced in Xinjiang region, it was presumed to be tainted. And it requires Chinese suppliers to disclose where their methods. I think we could apply that thinking into the critical minerals debate. You don't have to do anything, just ask them to start to disclose. U.S. mining companies are remarkably transparent. And they disclose all this stuff all the time in response to governments, in response to the NGO community and other interested stakeholders. Why aren't we asking the Chinese to do the same thing? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fernandez?
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, this is what a monopolist does. It floods the market. It cuts out the competitors. It's not just only in Montana, but in Australian mines have closed. Mines throughout the world have closed because of Chinese oversupply. I think tariffs are a tool. I would caution the overuse of tariffs. If we don't have the minerals in our country to replace those, then it doesn't do us any good. But in the case of minerals that we do have, I think tariffs are one of the tools that we have in our toolbox.
Well, thank you. I've got a lot more, but unfortunately I've run out of time, so Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you. We have some time for second rounds of questioning if the witnesses are okay to stay with us a little longer. Great. So let me first start with follow-up questions from what we were discussing earlier regarding the use of the Defense Production Act. I know, Senator, you just mentioned that you had a legislation in the Senate. I would love to take a look at it because I also serve on the House Financial Services Committee, Subcommittee on National Security and Illicit Finance, and we are trying to work for a modernized DPA. So your input today, as well as giving us some suggestion and recommendation on that regard, is greatly appreciated. So if you want to just talk about that just quickly.
Well, Madam Chair, first of all, I have two other articles I'd like to present for the consideration of the committee, which gives a breakdown on the background of critical minerals and rare earth sectors, and also the partners' critical mineral supply chain by country, the largest producers outside of China, so we know we can get these two things. I think that'd be helpful. We'll share also with you, as we talked about, the workforce, what we've done in that, and also the comparison we've done with some other bills. Happy to share all that with you, and I'll make sure that Peter back here gets it to you, okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you. And then as we are talking about breaking chokehold on China's dominance on critical minerals, rare earth elements, mining, producing, manufacturing, we just recently saw the announcement coming from the administration that Defense Department will be the largest shareholder of our probably the biggest rare earth producer, MP Materials. So I just wanted you to comment on that a little bit because we also saw this morning Apple. It's a big investment in the field as well. So can you, Mr. Fannin, talk about what we can learn from this deal?
Yeah, thank you. I would say that this deal is absolutely transformative in terms of the boldness and the scope, given that it's not just an investment, but also over time, offtake, and also price security, I would say. The Apple point is, I saw that announcement too, where Apple is going to invest as well because they want these magnets, which is critical to their business. And so what I think that the lesson here is, there's a role for the U.S. government as an investor in these projects, firstly, whether in the United States or internationally. But also, the lesson is that if there's an alternative supply chain, then U.S. companies will source from it. The move by the Defense Department is answering the chicken or egg problem, I would say. And so now we see a major investor coming in. I think that this is a model, whether it's Defense Department, the DFC, any other variety of other investors from the U.S. side. But it's that de-risking where you'll see those offtakes and other co-investments. And so I think it's absolutely transformative. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could say one thing.
Yes, go ahead.
I think basically with the federal government, as you saw, made the announcement last week into MP, which this is what it's about. When you see an offtake coming to the federal government guaranteed by, we're going to be needing this product and we're only going to buy it from American producer, changed the whole dynamic. And that allowed Apple and other people with large sums of money that can invest knowing that it's going to be protected and basically used within our own system.
Got it. Well, we also, go ahead.
Just
Sorry
quickly,
about that, Mr.
there are a
Fernandez.
couple of successful examples of the DPA being used in Canada for critical minerals, and that was done during the Biden administration. I would suggest you look at that. Those were successful. Also, one of the beauties of the deal with MP is that it actually, in the past, what we've done is we privatized the gains and socialized the losses. What this does is it actually makes the U.S. government a partner in the success, and I would look at that as an example going forward. It's not going to replace the private sector, but it certainly can be an early stage investor. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for that. Again, during our discussion, we also talked about the role of DFC playing a bigger role in this space. So our subcommittee is also charged with reauthorizing DFC before this fall, and we hope to do this soon. So we are looking at equity effects. We are also looking at expanding the countries that we can utilize our DFC in. So if you can talk about how that can be important tool going forward. Obviously, domestic production is critically needed. We all established that. But we also need to work with our allies and partners in the region. So how can this be a critical tool in our also diplomatic toolkit? Go ahead, Mr. Fernandez.
If I may, I've already talked about the need to fix the equity issue and also the need to expand the number of countries. But something we did as part of the Minerals Security Partnership is we created a finance network. And so I would urge the DFC as well as EXIM and others to spend more time with their counterparts in other countries. Why? Sometimes they can band together to de-risk some of these projects, but also just by sharing projects. There may be a project that the DFC is not interested in, and you'd be surprised. Often they wouldn't talk to their counterparts because they might be competitors. And so I would urge more involvement in terms of just exchanging projects, which is what the private sector does often.
I know my time's up, and I want to turn it over to my ranking member to ask more questions, but hopefully we can continue the conversation about some of the projects that our private sector can be encouraged and enticed to invest in, utilizing our tools like DFC and so forth.
Madam Chair,
Go
one
ahead.
final thing was this, access to capital is the mother's milk of production. Without capital, they can't produce, or they won't come to fruition. So that's what access to capital in every way, shape, and form is going to make the difference, whether we produce in time or we don't.
Thank you. Ranking
Great.
member?
And just for those watching at home, antimony is atomic number 51 on the periodic table with a symbol of Sp. Just in case I ever make it on Jeopardy, that's important information. I'm old enough to remember the energy crisis of the 1970s, just the long lines of folks waiting to fill up their cars with gasoline. And we responded as a nation, right? We created the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which has been used now over the last few decades to smooth out markets to address this. We're doing the same in APIs. Representative Moskowitz talked about COVID, and we realized very quickly our pharmaceutical industry was overly dependent, in this case again on the PRC, for those APIs. We do have a national defense stockpile for rare earths and critical minerals, but again, as been alluded to, it's woefully inadequate at this juncture. Again, I'm not a complicated person, but if prices are at historic lows, it would seem to me that now would be the time for us to actually be gobbling up that market and creating that national stockpile. Maybe, Undersecretary Fernandez, you were in administration, and again, it doesn't seem like rocket science, and then maybe Senator Manchin, since you're a fellow legislator, why is it that we seem to be lethargic in terms of recognizing, we know the risk, it's not a partisan issue. What's holding us back from actually very intentionally going in and creating the stockpile?
Well, I remember talking about it. Frankly, there was a lot of talk, but not a lot of action. The funding is an issue. And also, I think we've been slow to realize the vulnerability. But I do think your suggestion that we consider it is one that the time is now, because when you're as far behind as we are, you need all hands on deck. You need everyone on board. And unless we move quickly, unless we do what, for example, the senator just mentioned in terms of permitting, it takes us 10 to 20 years to build a mine. We can't continue operating that way. So it's all of the above and all hands on deck.
I think timing, Congressman Bear, timing is the thing, and uncertainty is the cost that no one can factor in. Those are the two things that really, permitting, like you said, from that standpoint, but people jumping in, a lot of people, litigation, they're going to go through litigation. We're a litigious type of mentality. Good in certain areas for protection, but also overdone in so many areas that stymies it.
Yeah, so there's nothing that prevents us from doing both of these things, right? Because we can build the stockpile immediately if we were to appropriate the right resources and funds, which it sounds like we really ought to do. And then opening up mines, doing the permitting reform will take a little bit longer, but earlier in this Congress, in a bipartisan way, we passed the Fix Our Forest Act. Now, not necessarily the same thing, but it was bipartisan. A lot of us as Democrats got tired of watching our forests burn, certainly in California. It has NEPA reforms in there, et cetera. So we can do permitting reforms, and again, it might be easier under a Republican administration.
We have the urgency now that we have with that.
Absolutely.
Right
And
now.
again, what I would urge my Republican colleagues to do is, now's the time. I'm not asking to meet at the 50-yard line. We don't have the White House. We don't have the majorities in the Senate or the House, but don't take us to the end zone. Like, we can meet at the 35-yard line. We can do this if we're willing to negotiate. And Senator Manchin, you did lead some of these efforts in the Senate. So maybe that is the starting point.
We've got we have some good, we're going to share that with you all, what we had done and what we come close to completing.
Yeah, and we ought to do it. Mr. Fannin, do you want to add anything on the petroleum reserves or the defense stockpile or permitting reform?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge the administration has started to talk about permitting reform. It has some executive orders to try to shorten some of these time horizons. I think the point you made about the forest is a good one. You decided to pass this legislation, move this bill, bipartisan bill, because you saw a crisis. And the crisis was real, it was material, it was, the smoke was around your house. People acted. I think we need to, this goes back to an earlier comment, this is a political problem. How do we create that sense of urgency with the American people that the smoke is around the house to create that move? And I think once you do that, then we'll see some action. I think we're starting that now.
Great, thank you. With that, I'll go and yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Representative Sherman from California for 5 minutes.
China controls most of this market. Is that because China is uniquely blessed by ores of all these rare earth minerals, or is that just because China decades ago decided to do the mining, which is difficult, and the processing, which I believe is even more difficult? I'll ask any of the witnesses.
Let me just say, if I can, very quickly,
Yes.
everything you just said was correct. They did something nobody else wanted to do. And if you won't do it in your own backyard, don't expect someone else to do it. China filled the void, and they saw it back when we got into the WTO in 1990s. And they went after where could they capture some markets and basically hold us hostage. And they've done it extremely, extremely efficient.
But other countries in the world have the ore deposits and could have done it. China did it.
China put the resources to it, yeah.
Gotcha.
They put the money to it.
There are those who advocate that America should have a strategic cryptocurrency. What? I guess one of our witnesses needed to leave. A cryptocurrency reserve, which seems bizarre. I've never heard of a short of cryptocurrency. As a matter of fact, if you want to get some Mongoose coin or some Skippity toilet coin, that's available to you right away, as are all the currencies. Do we have a rare earth minerals strategic reserve of any significance?
We have a defense reserve, which is woefully underfunded and not terribly well stocked, wherein there are some critical minerals. I don't have insight into what.
And that's not designed to support our economy. That's just designed to allow us to make weapons that we might not otherwise.
For defense.
And I'd point out we have a strategic petroleum reserve that we should be refilling now, because oil is under $70, and both administrations, particularly the prior ones, said that they would refill the reserve when oil went below 70, and that hasn't been done, but we continue to hold over $10 billion worth of cryptocurrency for reasons I have yet to figure out. China wants us to sell them the most advanced chips. NVIDIA is apparently going to be allowed to do that. To what extent did they get that incredible concession from us, because otherwise they wouldn't sell us the rare earth minerals? Was that their big stick?
I'm not gonna, I have no inside information on that one. But I will say that its dominance, China's dominance of critical minerals is a weapon, and they weaponize it, and they're good at it.
What other countries are moving toward developing rare earth minerals in a major way?
Australia is a big, is very much in the game. The Japanese are one of the leaders in some of the refining and magnet production as well. There's actually joint development programs with those three countries already in a company or two.
Now, China has lower labor costs than us and most of those other countries. Is a low labor cost critically important to being able to be competitive in this business?
I think when we talked about the rare earths, it's more than just the labor. It's also the cost of the capital to run the plants. And I think what someone has already alluded to, the way in which they do it is a manner that would be objectionable in the United States or in most other Western
What
countries.
would be objectionable in the
The way
United
in
States?
which they refine the rare earths, it's
Or you're talking about the local
Correct.
environmental
Correct.
impact?
That's right. That's right.
If you spend a bit more money, can you refine these minerals without, and still meet the community standards we expect in America?
For sure, yes. That's what I think the announcement was, we talked about earlier, the MP announcement, that's what they're seeking to do. There are other companies that are doing it as well.
Thank you.
Of course you can. I mean, it goes back to capital, and the fact that the PRC doesn't have the same standards that we do, environmental standards, labor standards. But that's an opportunity. That's why countries want to
We
invest.
certainly have capital. Much of it we bring in from China. And I'm going to yield back 10 seconds.
If I can just say one thing to you.
Yes, go
As far
ahead,
as,
sir.
you have United States, you have Canada, and you have Australia. Three main caches of where we know we have critical minerals we all need. Then you have the ability of Japan to do the refining. And South Korea is coming on strong, too. So these are all allies of ours in the free world. It's something we should be building an alliance with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Rep. Barra.
I just want to ask a quick follow-up question. Absolutely, we can do this. We've talked to the Australians a lot about it. We recognize that our price point, given the environmental standards, everything else, is going to be a little bit higher than where China is. We also recognize that China, Undersecretary Fernandez, you've talked about the monopolistic power. I think what I worry a little bit about is, this is tangential, but shareholder activism, right? There's tremendous pressure on boardrooms and companies for earnings, quarterly earnings, and it's proven extremely difficult for us to move some of our companies that even know the vulnerabilities, because there is going to be a short-term cost here that will impact their quarterly earnings. And we don't have to get into it, but I just put that one out there. That is something that we actually have to also think about, is the long-term investments that give them long-term profitability, as opposed to really the short-term investments that drive some of these decisions to continue staying invested in China or making further investments in China, even when they know the long-term vulnerabilities are there. So you want to talk about that?
It's become the American way, which is not beneficial for us right now. Basically, everything's return on investment, shareholders' demand, makes very, very bad decisions. And the bottom line is pay me now or pay me later. And right now we're paying the price. And if we don't get in the game pretty quick, and we don't look past the bottom line right now, if we'd have done that during World War II, we'd never won it. And we're in that same situation right now. It's a life or death matter for the 21st century, our children and grandchildren. So we're either going to get involved, commit ourselves to making us independent and making our supply chain intertwined. If not, God help us.
But it's also, I think, a role that government should play. And you're right that there is a short-term view, but that's where the government support can become involved to encourage a longer-term view. If you start from the premise that by 2035, according to most experts, lithium prices will recover, then you're looking at a short-term problem. And then you need to find a way to help our companies and our partner countries' companies just survive. And so that's an opportunity. But you're right, we do have, if we just let the market run the show, the PRC will dominate. We've got to find a way of changing that debate.
Yeah, I would just say the shareholder issue is, of course, plays both ways. It's also one of the reasons why why the mining industry in the United States, in particular, and a lot of other places, has died down, and why the best-in-class miners are reluctant to go to many emerging markets, because there's a fear of shareholder activism. There's a fear of going into certain countries because there's a perceived view that of political risk, which may have been a history, maybe it's there, but they don't go there. And so that simply leaves those emerging markets susceptible to Chinese opaque practices, which is one of the reasons why we're where we are. So I think it goes back to the earlier discussion about getting the American people to understand where things come from and how, and differentiate those.
Okay, with that, I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of this subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask you to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length of limitations. So without objection, the committee stands adjourned.